Hello, everyone. Mike and I are back at it. We are welcoming everyone. Got lots to talk about, but I'm Rosemary Enright, labor and employment attorney with Barclay Damon. I'm joined by my colleague, Mike Sciotti. Mike?
Hello, Rosemary. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. And today, in response to one of our clients' requests, we're going to be discussing breaks and meal periods in New York State. So that'll be the topic today. So get it teed up in your mind there, Mike. But beforehand, before we start, we've got to go with our question. So today's question, Mike, is if you were forced or required, basically, you got to leave the United States and live somewhere else, anywhere, where would it be?
Italy.
I love how fast you are with these answers, Mike. I mean, no pause. Tell
Nope.
us quickly, why Italy?
Food.
I knew you were gonna say that. I knew you were going to say food. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I was, initially I was thinking Ireland because I'm Irish, of Irish descent. And I love Ireland, and I thought it would be a lot of fun. And to my Irish, ancestors, I'm sorry. I think I'm going to have to go with Spain. And I love the food and their paella and all. It's great. And I also just like the pace of the life. Of course, it's similar, Mike, to Italy, right? So you'll be in Italy, I'll be in Spain. We can hop on the train and visit each other, right?
Only if I win Powerball tonight.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. That's right. So, all right, gang, let's jump right in here. Okay. So, New York State, Mike, New York State, it's labor law section 162, sets forth all the requirements around meal periods. All right. And, I think the reason, our client asked for this is because it can get confusing. There's a lot to it. So, Mike, I'm going to put the onus on you here. Break it down. All right, how should they be thinking about this?
Yeah, and let's keep it big picture because there's a lot of details you need to get into. Question one, there are two different rules. There's a rule for factory workers and non-factory workers. Factory workers get a 60-minute meal period. Non-factory get a 30-minute meal period. There's also one other classification that the 30-minute people can try to get it down to 20 minutes. They have to file a petition with the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor will come in and investigate. But first question simply is, which one are you, factory or non-factory? Then I think the next question is, how long does your shift last? Because the rules get tied into a shift of 6 hours or more. Next question is, what are the hours, start and end time of the shift? Because that will also determine the timing of it, and in some cases, whether you get a second meal period. So, in the big picture sense, that's it. But if I think that's the nice, simple explanation at the 50,000 foot level. But generally speaking, it's either going to be 60 or 30 minutes. I've seen very few 20s.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I think most employers fall into the 30-minute meal period. And that's what we're dealing with. And, a lot of what we have to deal with, Rosemary, are employees wanting to skip their meal periods, wanting to leave early,
Yeah. All right. Before you jump into that, I'm going to interrupt you, Mike. All
Yeah.
right. So let's talk. We're not going to go through the analysis right now, of a factory versus a non-factory, but, where can our listeners go? Like, obviously a factory, you're a big manufacturer. I mean, that's clear. But how does somebody know, am I a factory or non-factory?
So,
We produce widgets, but we're small. We do, they're just not sure. So where do they find that?
if you just go to Google, type in New York State Department of Wager meal period fact sheet or FAQs, they will take you to a 4 or 5 page document that walks you through the general questions that come up in this area. The department admits, Rosemary, and I think it's right in there, that this covers most everyone. There may be unique situations we haven't thought of that aren't directly qualified or covered by this guidance. So I think that's the easiest way. And when you get into that guidance, it walks you through all the questions that I just went through, and it defines who's a factory worker and who falls into everyone else. Nice and simple. This covers all employers in New York. It doesn't matter how big, how small you are. It doesn't matter if you're private sector or public sector.
Right. Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. Right, for everybody, does it apply to everyone? And the answer is yes. And we're going to talk about some of these unusual, like you said, the employee who doesn't want to take the lunch or wants to take a shorter lunch. We'll go through all of that. But before we do that, Mike, I have a lot of clients who have employees who say, "Hey, you're required to give me a 15-minute break, or I get a 20-minute break." Now, to be clear, Mike, they're not saying that it's a meal period. They're not saying, "Oh, because I've worked," as Mike said at the beginning, my hours, my shift started at this time, it goes to this time, it's X number of hours, it spans this, so I'm supposed to get that additional meal period, which Mike referenced. No, this is just, I in the morning get a 15 or 20-minute break midway between my actual meal period and when I started, and then at the end of the, in the afternoon. And what say you to that?
Ha, no.
That's what I say. That's what I say.
That
No.
does not exist under New York State labor law or under the U.S. Department of Labor purview. What the both departments say is this: if a employer allows a break, the break must be paid for purposes of wage and hour. A break is something that they define as less than 20 minutes. Typically, I think they say between 5 and 20.
20.
Where
Yeah.
we usually see this these are creatures that are created as a result of collective bargaining agreements entered into between an employer and a union. And that's where we see them a lot. We see them sometimes in private sector non-union shops, but that is a rarity. But the reality is no. And the other thing I'd say is you don't have to give smoking breaks either.
Yeah.
I've always chuckled at that one. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I got to go have a smoke. It's like, that's what your meal period's for. I mean, if you want to go smoke, but we don't have to grant a smoking break either.
Precisely, precisely. Yeah, and that's why I brought it up, Mike, because so many times we get employees saying, "Well, I'm entitled to a break." No, you're not. At least
Yeah.
not in New York State, you're not. So, all right. So, and it's so important for everybody to let that sink in. If you do permit breaks, again, they've got to be paid. If between 5 and 20 minutes, but which leads me also to my next comment, which is, meal periods. I love the way Mike laid it out. That's why I had him do it, the analysis. But remember, the meal periods are unpaid. Okay. So they are unpaid, which is very important for everybody to keep in mind. And they must be uninterrupted. And what we mean by that is that the employee can't do any work. If the employee does work, they're not getting that uninterrupted meal period, and you could have a wage and hour problem. All right. So, because again, what happens is, and we could talk about this for hours. If you have a person who's doing work during lunch, that's working time. If you didn't, let's say you've got them punching in and punching out, we'll talk about that in a minute. All of a sudden, the employee's saying, well, yeah, 2 or 3 times a week, I'm working that half an hour or 20 minutes in it, and 20 minutes of it, then all of a sudden, you've now got overtime issues, because that was working time, and it's going to and you didn't pay them for it. So it's very important that the meal period is the 60 minutes or the 30 minutes, and it is uninterrupted, no work. And if it is interrupted, you're going to pay that individual. And in fact, we talked about handbooks a lot, but What I always encourage my clients to do, Mike, and I'm interested in your opinion on this, when we talk about time records and timekeeping, if there is something, if an employee, I would include this in the policy, if an employee um, has to do work during a meal period, something comes up that happens, um, they need to let their manager know, right? Because we've got to pay them. So the onus is on them. All right. And in fact, I often say on the time cards, if you've got people that are reviewing them, they need to acknowledge that, yes, I have looked at this and these records are accurate. It accurately reflects my hours worked and hours that I didn't work. So there are breaks in that. So I just wanted to make those points, Mike, unpaid and uninterrupted. And I suspect there's probably more you want to add because we could talk about, do they have to stay on property or not? And other things. But I'll flip it to you.
Yeah, I don't think the answer to that question, I don't think the guidance or the law says they have to have the ability to leave. They just have to have the ability to have an uninterrupted meal period. And I've always interpreted that as you can make them stay. I've never seen an employer actually do that, but
Yeah.
maybe they do exist. I also have seen, Rosemary, we'll talk about the auto doc in a second, but I've seen the opposite. I've seen where employers are paying the people
Mm-hmm.
in full, and I believe that's a problem. Not you're free to give away as much money as you want, and this is an example of you doing it. I don't have a problem with the payment. I have a problem now. How do you prove that Johnny was given an uninterrupted meal period?
Mm-hmm.
And the second problem is an overtime issue, because if you're taking the position, I paid them when I didn't have to. That was non-work time, and really the person's paid for 42.5 hours during the week, but only 40 were work time. The class action attorney is going to look at that saying Johnny is owed 2.5 hours of
Mm-hmm.
overtime, and they're going to come after you. So I think there's some risks, and I don't like the risks associated with paying for the
Yeah.
meal period. I just wouldn't do
I
it.
agree. I agree. I don't like it either. Well, and I've also had employers say, well, I paid them. So if they worked a few minutes during it, it's not a big deal because I paid them. And it's to the point you just made, Mike. It is a big deal,
Yeah,
right? Because of that class action plaintiff's attorney who's out there just chomping at the bit.
yeah,
Exactly. Well, and to your point, you can't prove it. And you know what's going to happen? I have a thing right here. And Johnny all of a sudden is going to come in and say, well, you know what? I kept track of all the time I worked and it's right here. And lo and behold, and of course you, employer, because you were paying them and said, "Oh, don't worry about punching in or punching out. We'll talk about that again in a minute." Um, Now, guess what the DOL is going to rely on? They're going to rely on this little book right here.
yeah.
And there's not a doggone thing we can do, Mike.
That
You
is
know?
totally correct, and that is exactly, don't do it. It's I know you're trying to be nice, employers, but sometimes that will simply backfire and blow up in your face, and it can blow up in your face in a big way in this area.
Yeah. All right. So, Mike, we've hinted or not hinted, but made that talked about auto docking. Go ahead. I want to hear your thoughts, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah, so I believe, and I believe the law indicates in sum and substance, you need to be able to prove the meal period. So the general rule I have is make them punch in and out for their 30-minute meal period. Let's assume it's 30 minutes. Some employers don't make them do that. They do what's called an auto dock, and they automatically deduct 30 minutes a day from their wages for the meal period. And the rationale is, well, we told them to take it. And you're going to run into the same scenario where they're going to say, no, no, I worked. Here's my little journal.
Yep.
You owe me overtime. And you've walked right back into a class action suit again. The auto doc works if everyone, one, follows it, and two, you have no truly evil employees who are looking to take money from you.
Right.
And that's a rarity because usually you have at least one.
Yeah.
So I think the auto dock I'm not a fan of. There are problems with making them punch in and out. I forgot. All right, and then your supervisor's got to make some notation on the time card. Is it a real time card? Is it an electronic time card? I mean, there's a lot of issues that roll out of it. It's not a perfect system, but I am a fan of making them punch in and out for their meal periods and holding them to it. And if there's a mistake, making sure the supervisor corrects it. And going back to your one of your first points, hey, if you actually worked during your meal period, here's the process for you to follow to notify us because we don't have a crystal ball. And if they didn't do that, we could use that against them.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you, Mike. Punch in, punch out. All right. Now, yeah. So I'm going to ask you this, Mike. What about the employee who says, you know what? I really, I don't need lunch. Okay. I'm this year I'm doing, there's something called where I can't remember what it's called. I just read about in my People magazine, which is my guilty pleasure. And it's, all these, you don't eat in certain hours and all this other stuff. And so this person says, you know what? I skip lunches. I'm fasting. So I'd like to work and then I'm going to leave a half an hour early. What say you to that, Mike?
The answer is don't do it on a consistent basis. The department recognizes that if that occurs from time to time, it's okay. They don't tell us how many times is okay for that to happen in a calendar year, but what they're going to look for is a pattern. And if they see that Johnny leaves a half hour early every Friday because you're letting him work through lunch, they're going to violate you. And that's your problem. But if it's I have to leave a half hour early this one day because my daughter has a dance recital and I got to get there a half hour early, and you
Yeah.
say okay, I think that's fine. It's when it becomes a pattern, it's repeating, it's more the norm than the exception. Um, and generally speaking, you don't have to allow it. So, you can say no. Your shift starts at 9, it ends at 5. I don't care if you work through your lunch. I'm going to pay you for that, but you're still going to work till 5. And if you walk out, I can discipline you. So,
Right.
you hold the cards here, and it's really a question of how you want to. I view it enforce it against employees because I'm okay with the exception. Who hasn't run into that
No.
situation where I need to leave early? The other thing, it goes hand in hand with this, and can you waive the meal period? And the New York State Court of Appeals has said if you have a union and if it's without duress or coercion and it's negotiated, the answer is maybe. If you do it right and you follow the Court of Appeals guidance within the collective bargaining agreements, you might be able to do that. But so far, that's really one of two big exceptions that exist to the meal period. And I'll let me pause there and not go into the
Yeah.
other one until you tell me to.
Yeah, you can talk about it in a minute. Yeah, and I was going to say, well, and it's important that, in the collective bargaining agreement that you recognize that, this is what we're entitled to, and, basically, you'd say it in a far more eloquent way than this, but we recognize what our rights are, and this is what we have agreed to as the exclusive bargaining agent for this particular unit. So you actually acknowledge so that the New York State knows that, oh, they knew what they were entitled to, and they wanted actually to do it in this format, breaks here, breaks there, and that. So that's fine. The other thing I would say here, Mike, is when we're talking about the employee who wants to skip lunch. and so they can leave early. That makes me think of the employee who consistently works through lunch, right? And so I've had many a DOL audit, and they're going through the records and they can see, and they've interviewed people, and they look and they say, okay, well, I'm not seeing punch outs here for this individual. I spoke to this individual. They said they worked through it, and I can see your overtime wasn't calculated. And then it becomes a whole thing, as we know. And so what I always say, and actually I can attribute this to the Department of Labor, if you have an employee who says, I've got too much work, I'm behind, I have a deadline I have to meet, whatever the reason is, and they say, I'm going to do work. What do? You discipline them. All right. That's what you have to do. And I know that sounds crazy. You're sitting there thinking, wow, I have an employee who actually wants to work and they want to make their deadlines. That's great. You're lucky. You're one of the lucky ones. However, you need to protect the company, and you need to comply and when I say protect the company, you need to comply with the labor laws. And the labor law says they must have a 30-minute or 60 uninterrupted meal period. And if they do work through it, you're in violation, and you're going to end up with the DOL knocking on your door, and it's not going to be pretty. So as hard as that is, for people to do, you have to discipline. That is always what the DOL will say to you, discipline. So somebody wants to work, somebody takes one that's shorter. Like I've had my employees who will punch out because they're supposed to punch out, and then they'll punch back in 10 minutes later. And they'll say, I ate a yogurt. That's all I wanted. Okay. I'm sorry. That's not going to cut it. Got to be 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And remember, discipline, folks, does not mean terminate.
Yeah.
It could be a verbal, a written, and maybe a lot of writtens. But the department's going to look for something to show that you took it serious in discipline. And once what if you got 50 of them? Well, I'm not sure I'm going to fire the person if I got a worker. I could appease the department by showing them I did what you said. I disciplined. The other part of it, will the department come after you if there are no wage and hour violations, but maybe just a meal period here or there? Generally, my experience has been no. They'll leave you alone. They'll warn you what the law is.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell you we might be able to fine you, but I haven't seen a fine per se for just meal period violations. It's usually there's a fine when there's an other wage and hour violation, like you forgot to pay Johnny, and then they'll fine you for the meal period. So there is a risk here, but part of it, I got to tell you, I think the discipline, Rosemary, I have always viewed as form over substance, and I tell employers do it. I'm not sure they're going to do anything to you if if you've paid the employee appropriately. So there's some risk, but discipline away.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, you don't want to end up on the wrong side of that. So Mike, there was something I want to talk about, what if we have one employee on duty? We'll talk about that in a minute, but there was something else. You said, oh, there's another exception. And you were after you talked and you said, but let me take a pause there. And then,
The one employee shift that I was going to go.
Oh, that's what you're, how funny. Yeah. The one employee shift. Exactly. Well, and what's interesting is, I've had this a lot. I've got quite a few employers, and I've drafted forms for them, Mike, for this one employee shift that the employees all sign. So go ahead. I'll let you talk about it since you would.
Yeah. And this is something the department is starting to narrow who is eligible for it. It used to be they used to have an example, the pharmacist. You have to have a pharmacist on duty for the pharmacy to be open. And then all of a sudden, I start seeing pharmacy closed for meal period from 1:30 to 2 every day. And you drill down a little bit, the department went after him saying, It's not a one person shift because there are others there working. The one example where I see the one person shift be enforced is, the late night person who's working at a gas station or mini mart.
That's literally what I was just because I had this. I literally that was my example. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
that or the person that works at the hotel checking people in at 2 in the morning. There's
Mhm.
usually only one person working. Those cases, it's going to be okay if you to basically um, have them. I use the term waive the meal period if you get a written consent. But if they want an uninterrupted meal period, they're entitled to one, and that creates some problems for you. How am I going to do that if there's only one person on? So I would simply say it's a narrow exception, one that those two examples are the first ones that always come to mind for me. And you better make sure you're right because this is one of them where I think they may be a little less forgiving and say, wait a minute, you didn't give them the meal period and at all, and they may come
Yeah.
after you a little bit harder.
Yeah, and you know what where else I've run into it? So I had somebody who was making the sandwiches for a Subway in a mini mart, right? And so they were the only person there and same thing. So but the other one where I've come up with, and this has been interesting, Mike, are home healthcare aides. Right. So they're going in and and they're working a shift. Like they work during the day from, they get there at 8 and they leave at 4 and they've got to have lunch in there and they can't leave. They're working with a client who has a traumatic brain injury. Can't leave them alone. They've got to be in their sight the whole time. And so again, we put together a form and of course, like you said, if we've had individuals who have said, no, I want my uninterrupted meal period, then what we've done is said, well, we're going to have to put you on different shifts then or something, or because we can't leave these clients unattended, right? So yeah, it does come up, but and like I said, the form that I've drafted, I'm sure yours is similar, Mike, is just talks about the nature of the business, why it could occur, explaining that they're on a one employee shift and that they have a right to this meal period. Do they waive it? Yes or no? And what I always include language in there, Mike, that says if they do not want to waive that right, there's no sort of it will not impact their employment status, nor will there be any sort of retaliatory action taken because they are entitled to that meal period.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what my form looks like. I suspect yours probably is the same.
Nearly identical, and I would say follow that guidance, people.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, all right, so let me ask you, I think this was kind of what we talked on this, touched on this a little, Mike, but let's put a finer point on it. Could, an employee, like, could we say to an employee or go to an employee and say, you know what, we don't want you to take meal periods on for whatever reason it might be. So in other words, can they consent to not taking a meal period? Like if the employee says, "Hey, really, I don't need this meal period. You need somebody to work extra, I'll do it." What say you to that?
Uh, unless you fall into the union exception or the one person shift rule, I believe the answer is no, you cannot do that.
Yep,
And
I agree. I
that,
agree, Mike.
that's just the reality of it. I know it's irritating because I know a lot of people listening to this. You'll work at your desk through lunch, the two of us included.
Yeah,
I get it. And that's the reality, but it's also a safety issue. And what the government is simply saying is give the mind a half hour away from work, eat, drink, and then go back to work.
yeah.
And that is the way I think you need to look at the rationale behind this, but don't try to get too fancy because there's not a lot of wiggle room here.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, I like that, eat, drink, and I was gonna put "and be merry"
Yeah,
on the
I would let you vary, but I said, "Yeah, all right."
Yeah, exactly. Well, I said it for you, Mike. And then before we started recording this episode, Mike, we were talking about the whole going to the commissioner and requesting shorter meal periods, and you've done that. So share with everybody your experience and your thoughts on it.
There's an application you have to complete, and it's on investigation, which means the commissioner of labor is going to send wage and hour investigators in to do interviews, to look at the workplace, to talk to workers, things like that. You better make sure it's worth it because they're coming in, and just be cognizant of that. And once I tell employers that, usually they run the other way and say, "No, we're good. We'll keep it at 30 minutes." I think that's good advice. You
Yeah.
really need a really, really good reason to get it down to 20. Um, do I think we can come up with those reasons? Sure. I think it just depends on the workforce. You have the absolute right to do it. They don't have to grant it. I'm just telling you, it's not an automatic thing, and there will be an investigation.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think that's sound advice. And Mike, this one just popped into my head. All right. And I want to think about how I want to uh, pose the question or put it out there for us to chat, and then we'll wrap up because I want to be respectful of the time. So, what about so factory workers? We've got 60 minutes, and I know why they're doing that. But let's say it isn't a massive, and the punchline there, gang, is because if you're in a massive, think about Amazon, like one of those fulfillment centers, and they've got to walk. It was Amazon, right, Mike, where they had to walk like 10 minutes to get to the break room.
Yeah.
So by the time they walked to the break room, it was almost time to turn around and come back, and they didn't have time to eat or something like that. But that's what I want to put out there for everybody to just think about and for you to opine on, which is, look at, your workplace and where your employees are taking their meal periods. Because if you're saying your 30 minutes starts, all right, you go at noon, okay, it's noon, go, and they've now got to go to their locker. All right. And maybe go to the locker first, and maybe they've got to take some equipment off or something, then go and eat. Then they got to come back, put their equipment on. How do employers deal with that, Mike? I mean, and how is and can all of that be included in the 30 minutes?
Yeah, it is a uninterrupted meal period. That is what the law requires. So I don't think the walking, the changing clothes, any of that is going to fall into it. And then it's a question of, is that hours worked? My gut is telling me yes. That is hours worked. And so be cognizant. Maybe you got to be creative, not make your employees walk 10, 15 minutes to the break area. We figure something out. We'll bring your lunches to you, and we have these tables set up over here for you.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, so it's not as simple as allowing it. You have to allow it in reality. And so that's my answer.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I hadn't thought of that, Mike, but that's a great answer. If there's a long distance to walk, that maybe it is you set up an area, where people can hang out and eat, something like that. It's interesting. There's a manufacturer here. I was going to say the name, and then I thought maybe I shouldn't. But here in Buffalo, and it's interesting because it's huge. It takes up an entire city block, and they have tables set up right outside it, because I know in the building where a lot of people are who are working, and they've got all these tables like literally right outside the door. Like, I'm sure they're working just on the other side.
Yep.
But it's perfect because, I mean, they're outside, they can go, and they've got these tables and that, and I suspect that's why they did that for that very reason.
That won't
So
work in the winter, but that's
no,
good.
it will not. It's certainly not in Buffalo.
Yeah.
Certainly not in Buffalo. But anyway, all right, Mike. I think that's everything. Can you think of anything else?
Not really. The without getting into some details that will bore people out of their minds, but the take a look at that FAQ. I think it's critical. I think it will help you fill in the blanks and take it step by step. Factory worker, non-factory worker. Are we dealing with 60 or 30? Are we dealing with the start time? Is it a shift of 6 hours or more? Do the detail work, and that fact sheet will help you walk you through it.
Yeah, and it'll pay off in the end.
Yeah.
It really will. So, all right. Well, as always, Mike, I had a blast. Love doing this with you. And for my dear client who specifically requested this, hopefully we answered all your questions. If not, reach out to us. I know you will. And for everybody else, anybody can reach out to us, but go ahead, watch us, like us, provide your comments, Spotify, YouTube, all those other places. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, dear listeners. Have a great day, and we'll catch you on the other side.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
The Labor and Employment Podcast is available on barclaydamon.com, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms. Be sure to like, follow, and stay connected for future episodes.